Good everyone and welcome to this video. Today we have another episode in the Should You Talisman series, and today we're actually taking a look at a bit of an ancient plane, the P-36G. And this is going to be an interesting one because this plane actually has a little bit more potential, which, well, I say potential, more like meme potential, and sadly Gaijin I don't think ever's going to give us it, but we'll talk about that once we get into the aircraft a little bit more in detail. So in the description below, as per usual, there will be the usual timestamps where you can skip ahead to the overview of the aircraft, the test flight where we'll be taking a look at how the aircraft handles and its overall performance, and finally the competition and conclusion. Without further ado, let's get in and discuss the P-36G. So this is actually a plane that is so extremely old, let's put it that way. There used to be a time where this thing was pretty well respected back in the very old days of Air Arcade, and even Air RB, because it pretty much had everything he was looking for. Good overall performance, decent firepower, etc. But this plane, as you can probably expect, has lost a lot of its touch over the years. It's really struggling now. And yet it's still sat at 2.7, which it really shouldn't be, in my personal opinion. Sure, it's still got the decent firepower going for it, but that performance is really starting to show its age. But, well, that's pretty normal for most planes, to be honest. So, let's get in and discuss the overview of the aircraft. So, starting off with the engine, which doesn't really change much. This is the R18 2095 with 1200 horsepower on WEP. This is a bit shit for 2.7, I'll be honest, like, in terms of its fighter compadres. But it's not the worst. It's definitely not the worst. Its overall power at higher altitudes is also quite lacking, and at higher altitudes you will be really slow compared to the other monoplane fighters. So this is something you need to take into account. But that's where this aircraft does have a few metrics which can definitely help it out. In terms of firepower, you do have two 50 caliber machine guns with 200 rounds each, both of which are in the engine cowling, and then we do have four 7.62s in the wings with 500 rounds each. Overall, the firepower is actually pretty alright. It's not obviously the best because obviously it doesn't have cannons or anything like that, but it's not bad. It's definitely not the worst because obviously this armament is even showing its age, but it's still something. But of course, as you can probably tell, all the fuel is stored in the middle of the aircraft, which when we get that goddamn fuel slider, we'll be able to take a lot less fuel in this thing, and it will make it a menace. But this does mean the aircraft does feel a bit mid-heavy, so it can lack a bit in the low-speed dogfights. But it's more than enough to deal with a lot of the aircraft that you'll come across that isn't Japanese. So it's enough. In terms of armor, you only have one plate, which is a single 9.5mm plate, and it's at 7.5, I don't know why. And, well, it's to be expected. It's an early war fighter from the 1930s. It's not going to be the best in terms of its armor protection. No bulletproof glass, no engine protection, no nothing. So this is all you get. On a positive note, you do get self-sealing fuel tanks, but I never put fires out in these things. So, yeah, this is just something to consider. Now, as I mentioned in the last Should You Talisman episode, this vehicle could carry bombs. As you can tell by these little racks here. Now, those bombs, to be precise, are very tiny ones, or two 100-pounders. That wouldn't really add much to the aircraft, but it would give it another reason to really be considered, because having bombs on something this maneuverable, even if they're just small bombs, is definitely something that would help it out. And like I said, it can have really small, I think 30 pounders. Whilst it wouldn't add a lot, it's just something extra to the plane that can help it out. And as I said, it can carry two 100-pounders in real life. Obviously in game it doesn't. So it would just add it a bit more consistency in its overall capabilities. But overall, it's definitely showing its age in terms of its performance, but its overall armament is still nothing to be sneezed at. It's not obviously the best for 2.7, like you're still using 30 cals in large quantities, but it's still got those 250s which have the punch, because obviously they are the early belts, but they still have enough punch, And if you run the stealth, you have a chance of setting more fires on the 7.62s. So that is something. Without further ado, let's get into the test flight and let's see how this thing handles. See you shortly. And welcome to the test flight. So, let's get underway. As I said, the engine power for this thing is quite low for its BR. Like, it's not the lowest, as I said. There are definitely fighters with lower engine power, but you definitely do feel the performance dropping off compared to the earlier Hawks. Because obviously this has to fight much more difficult opponents in general. But that being said, it still does have a few things going for it. As I said, the firepower is fine. It's obviously showing its age. But where the Hawk makes up is not the roll rate, but its raw turn. Even on keyboard, this thing pulls very tightly for an American aircraft. It's still got its old flight model from, like, because this thing's not had a flight model change in years. It's still got a very old Hawk flight model. And as a result of that, it does have still that great maneuverability it's always been known for. It's obviously not going to beat stuff that are Japanese, but it's maneuverable enough to the point where you can go, yeah, I'm able to beat a lot of aircraft in this thing. And you can just see, like, the maneuverability, whilst the rudder is a bit weak, at higher speeds anyway, the roll rate is the same, but overall, it handles really nicely, and you can just see what I mean. But obviously the engine power, as you can see, does limit it in vertical maneuvers, so that is something to consider if you are going to Talisman this plane. But it does still have the old funky Hawk wobble. So there is a lot still going for it to say it's an old plane. It's definitely not as strong as it used to be, but it's still got it in terms of its handling. Like I said, if we had bombs, that would just add another level of efficiency to it, because it can do a little bit more than what other non-bombed fighters could do, if that's even a word. But like I said, they've gone through the trouble of actually modelling the racks for the smaller bombs. So where's the harm in giving this thing its old bombs? And here you can see one of the old funky manoeuvres you used to be able to pull in the Hawk. It's quite a fun one, but obviously consider the wet, because after a few minutes it does start to boil. So don't over-wet the engine, but it's still got it. Its handling is still pretty good. But it's just if you want to trade that performance is really where it comes into play. But anyway, I'm going to get us back to the hangar and we can discuss this aircraft's rather in-depth competition. See you shortly. And welcome back to the hangar. So as you can probably expect, there's going to be a decent amount to discuss here. And it really comes down to just its overall competition just being more suitable. Things like the P-40, which, yeah, the P-40 is not exactly a stellar plane, well, the E specifically. It's not exactly what you would call stellar in terms of its overall performance, especially at the higher altitudes. But the fact is that the same BR a little bit higher in terms of its overall performance. You have the F, which all I'll say is if you liked the E, you're going to love this one because this has a Merlin in it, which, well, if it's powered by a Brit, you know it's good. That's automatically what it is. It's why the Americans begged us to put the Merlin in the Mustang, pretty much. Well, more like we wanted it, but you get my point. The fact is that the Merlin engine just really improves the Warhawk's capability, and yeah, comparing it to the P-40E is no real contest, so this is definitely one of the candidates. In terms of other aircraft, though, there is stuff like the P-38G. I have covered the P-38 in the last Should You Talisman, and this is something where you kind of have to just look at it and think, am I a fan of twin-engine heavy fighters? Am I a fan of boom and zooming? Because the P-38s are very boom and zoom focused. They're not really turn fighters. They can turn, but not very good. But once you get down to swings with the P-38G, which is the recommendation I prefer, because I prefer the G, not the E, it's really a solid aircraft. Like, this thing used to be 3.7. It was dropped to 3.3 because of American teams, which that's normal. And it is still really good to this day. It's just a lot of pilots don't know how to fly it. So if you're not sure how to fly it, don't talisman it. In terms of other aircraft considerations, there's the P-51C and the P-39N. These are notoriously good aircraft and have been well-rounded for years now. And for some reason, the American Cobra, which, fair enough, they had the AP round, this gets the proper 37 belts, but the Russian ones don't. Gaijin, please don't nerf my Cobras any further. My Russian Cobras don't get flown much as it is. But you get my point. A plane like this, and a plane like the P-51C, are just incredibly good candidates for a new player to consider. Another good candidate is the F4U-1D. This thing used to be my little exploit plane, so to speak, but then they dropped it to rank 2. It's like Gaijin had enough of my shit. But yeah, this is perfectly solid. It has a bit more horsepower than the 1A, and it also carries a decent bomb load of 2 1,000-pounders. And yet we still don't have bombs on the US Marine Corps Corsair, which was literally made to take off from runways so they could carry more shit. But, well, that's Gaijin for you. And in terms of bombers slash ground attackers, there's only two considerations. One of which is the Apache, which is for some reason at 2.7 now. I don't know why. I think it's all the tanker trash strapping freaking gunbots to it, but we'll get that point across. And then the SB2C4 Helldiver. This thing needs no introduction. And that brings us to the conclusion. Whilst I do think the Hawk has still got it in terms of its overall handling and its overall flight characteristics, its performance and its aging firepower just really holds it back. And for a new player, whilst this thing is still somewhat forgiving, and obviously they will be flying the earlier Hawks, so it is something that they'll be used to, its overall abilities just can't keep up with the competition these days. Now, sure, if someone gets the bright idea to turn fight this thing and anything that isn't Japanese, they're going to pay for it. This thing still has that maneuverability, which people do not expect. But the fact is not everyone's going to do that, and they're just going to use their speed and completely kick your ass in that regard. You just won't be able to keep up. So, in my personal opinion, I would give this aircraft a miss, but it's a close miss because I still have a bit of nostalgic bias, but, well, that's pretty normal. In terms of the next aircraft in the series, we're going to be going up to the P-39N Airacobra, which we obviously discussed this plane, so that is something. And, well, yeah, it does have some ground ordnance which we can discuss because we actually get to discuss some bazookas, which I love bazookas, but they're shit. But you get my point. And we also get to discuss the biggest cannon that we've had so far in the series, which, well, this will be interesting, won't it? But anyway, I'm going to leave it all to it for today. I really hope you enjoyed seeing the P-36G as part of the Should You Talisman series, and I will see you all on the next one.